Prestige and power. Both are distinct, but are bound together, for they feed upon one another. Those with prestige can acquire power, and those with power almost inevitably must secure prestige. Unfortunately, these elements can also form a poison to the soul, as much as they can enrich those who possess them. And once obtained, the vain will flaunt their new status in myriad ways. In the realms of the inner sphere, this has been manifested throughout the centuries by any number of examples. The rampant defense spending of the Cameron dynasty in the latter portion of the Star League era, with them building the grandest army in history with no enemies to fight, as a way to signal to their allies their own greatness. Ironically, in doing so, they created the very enemies they feared. This all came crashing down with time, as all the ghosts the Camerons had been creating, as well as their decadence, caught up with them. In another instance, we can look at the enormously heavy war machines and military formations of the Lyran Commonwealth in the years following the Succession Wars. This kind of flaunting had consequences, and ones which inevitably atrophied the Steiner state over time in terms of its military competence. When war becomes an idle fancy for the rich, the institutions which the state relies on will suffer, and almost necessarily it will all come crashing down. Famously, this happened in one other place, and there is no greater symbol of that than of one of the mightiest war machines created in response to the clan invasion. But this was not built by the Star League, nor was it assembled within the great foundries of Hesperus by Defiance Industries in the Lyran Commonwealth. No, this crime against peace was crafted by a nation living a lie, and one which was flexing its muscles as never before. This was the face of something dark and dishonest, but which empowered those responsible for the deception. Noble and pure to the outside, but only to conceal the rot within. It resembled the very mythological deities which it derived its name from. It also, tragically, resembles the state that built it. There were 4 brothers amongst the great titans that followed Kronos from Mount Othuries: Atlas, Prometheus, Epithemius, and Menoetius. Atlas survived, but came to hold up the sky. Prometheus gave fire to man and was punished severely for it. Epithemius embodied hindsight and second thought. And the last, Menoetius, was the embodiment of power, pride, and prestige, as well as reckless action and anger. But he was also doomed by his hubris from the moment his story began. In this overview, we are going to examine one such titan, the one forged of myomers, circuitry, and steel, the avatar of the doomed one, Menoetius, the brother of Atlas, and one shackled to the legacy of the Free Worlds League and House Marik. A god born in the forges of Earthworks Incorporated's massive facilities on Keystone. Let us explore this great work, their great labor, the Grand Titan. While we fought and died trusting that all was well back home, a cancer was allowed to grow that has now seized our hearts and souls. The hegemony is lost, and our hopes with it. General Alexander Kerensky announcing the Embers coup to his troops, February 15th, 2767. 1,000 stories begin in the Star League era, seemingly, and rightly so, because before there was a Grand Titan, there was a failed precursor, and much like the Titans of Orethes ruled before the Olympians, so did the Titan emerge before its grand descendant. Or at least, something akin to it was conceived in this time period, but never reached its full maturation. For you see, the Star League, the supposed pinnacle of human technology, social development, and military power, by the time of the 28th century, had entered a terminal phase in a multitude of ways, even prior to the Embers insurrection. The Camerons, out of concern from threats coming from within the Star League, both real and imagined, began to spend enormous amounts of funds on the Star League defense forces. Tragically for the residents of the fabled Star League, and especially the Terran Hegemony, they would find their final years under the rule of one Richard Cameron, the son of the much more capable, though still overburdened Simon Cameron. Richard was a socially awkward, angry, wasteful individual who was heavily influenced by Stefan Embers. Still child throughout much of the saga of the acceleration of the decline of the League throughout the 2750s, it was Alexander Kerensky who was forced to shoulder the burden of dealing with the other 5 lords of the Star League during this time. Those lords then began abusing their position of power within the Star League's council for their own benefit. They removed forces restrictions on their militaries that had been in place to ease tensions in earlier times, clearly preparing for war with one another, and potentially with the League itself. This compelled the SLDF and Terran Hegemony in turn to begin to ramp up their own defenses, with the SLDF, ironically the protectors of all, increasingly becoming a Terran project. This was done to protect the beating heart and institutions of the Star League, as Kerensky tried desperately to prepare for a potential conflict with any one of the other states comprising the League. When Richard Cameron came of age to take up the title of Director General of the Terran Hegemony and the First Lord of the Star League, he'd become a vain, entitled, incompetent, spiteful little man. But most lamentably of all, he believed that everyone had to, under all circumstances, do as he commanded, including the other lords of the Star League. Instability began to rise as border skirmishes between the houses accelerated. Military procurements in the member states flew out of control. In 2762, the consequences of the failed raising of Richard Cameron, the military strife, and the decline of the Star League all came to a head when Richard crafted, upon his entry into legal adulthood, Executive Order 156. He demanded the disarmament of all of the great houses' militaries, save for his own realms and the SLDF. This escalated the arms race in the Inner Sphere even more after the Director General was rejected. Mechs were being brought in more and more in order to potentially combat the other house armies during this time period. In 2743, the King Crab was first introduced. By 2755, the legendary AS-70 Atlas was built explicitly to drive fear into the hearts of the would-be challengers to the SLDF in the periphery and great houses. But there are myriad other designs that were offered up in the Star League's rush to checkmate their member states in this dangerous game of arms production. Some, though, instead of being storied legendary battlemechs from a bygone era, ended up as mere footnotes in history. One such case was the Titan, conceptualized and brought before General Alexander Kerensky in 2765, a mere year before the beginnings of Stefan Embers' vicious overthrow of the Cameron dynasty, which started with the murder of Richard Cameron. The TI-1A Titan was to be the next monster placed within the enormous arsenal of the SLDF, or at least that is what its designers hoped for. What Kerensky's reception of the prototype was, we aren't as of this time sure of, but what is known is that the Titan never entered into proper production, not even during the civil war that gripped the Hegemony and Inner Sphere in an effort to remove Embers from power. There were many other alternatives in this weight category that were built instead, and they were machines that took on the lessons learned from the titanic clashes between the SLDF and the RimWorld's army. While the Titan was never put into production, some of these other powerful and noteworthy battlemechs that were put into service, even as the wars began to rage, were the Nightstar and Thunderhawk. These monstrosities existed for the SLDF to cope with this era of catastrophic military, economic, and political collapse. War changed even by the time the Titan prototype had been proposed, and it changed even more only a handful of years later. It's a mech whose time came and went before it was ever truly tested, but it would go on to have a legacy well past the era of the Star League. In the destruction of the Embers Civil War and the succession wars that followed, a great volume of Star League projects, technologies, and secrets were buried beneath the rubble. Research facilities, military safe houses and warehouses, abandoned military bases, and a multitude of other lost locations became the most valued stores of humanity's height of technology. Despite never being built beyond its prototype, despite being forgotten even in its own era, there was a whisper left over of the Titan. One which echoed throughout the ages, because concealed in one of these ruins of the past, its prototype survived the Embers coup and succession wars, waiting to be rediscovered. A theoretical assault mech weighing in at 100 tons, the TI-1A Titan was one of the Star League's failed prototypes, not because it had anything particularly wrong with it, but in the atmosphere of the late Star League and Embers Civil War, it was a dated machine in many ways, and was not worth putting into accelerated production and adoption. Using introductory technologies, the 1A doesn't utilize the advanced features that had become available to the Star League some centuries earlier, either for budgetary reasons, or simply because it was an early model prototype. To begin our journey of it, let us begin going over its chassis. Getting us started, it has an internal structure, gyro, and cockpit, for obvious reasons. To keep the mech running cool, it installs 12 tons of single heatsinks, letting it blast away 22 points of heat per turn, and it will definitely need to do this. When it comes to mobility, the Titan runs a 19-ton 300 standard fusion engine, the only true option for a 100-ton assault mech using introductory technologies if we're honest. This lets it run 54 kilometers per hour, which is not inadequate. To move faster, it'd require more than half the mech's overall weight, so this just is not an option. For protection, it had 19 tons of standard plating, the same as an Atlas, meaning yes, it was very well guarded. Its weapons package was also very impressive in many respects. To start with, it had twin PPCs, with one in each side torso. These were intended to punch through targets at range, in order to create holes for its close-range weapons to exploit. In the arms, it had 6 medium lasers, with 3 on each side. This represented a heavy amount of firepower for the era and the design. There's nothing ever wrong with a medium laser. Finally, it had an enormous amount of SRMs, numbering 4 SRM-4s which were divided once more between its right and left torsos, and also an SRM-6 which was housed in the center torso. This was all fed by 3 tons of SRM ammunition, with one of those 3 tons being dedicated to the SRM-6. In some respects, it was overgunned. Many of its systems couldn't be safely used in tandem with one another, without dramatically overdrawing from its heat budget, but if used smartly, it could fire any one set of its weapons relatively easily. The PPCs at range? No problem. The medium lasers in close to slice off armor? Great. The SRMs for when the target is vulnerable? Perfect. It just couldn't combine any of these elements together effectively necessarily. Still, had it gone into production, there's little doubt it would have joined its fellow Titan, the Atlas, as a terrifying 100-ton monster in the succession wars. It just never did. And amongst the foremost Kotos and Pererios and Gaius in state for war raised fierce fighting. 300 rocks, one upon another, they launched from their strong hands and overshadowed the Titans with their missiles, and buried them beneath the wide-pathed earth, and bound them in bitter chains, when they had conquered them by their strength for all their great spirit, as far beneath the earth, to Tartarus. Hesiod recounting the defeat of the Titans, and their imprisonment in Tartarus. Humanity fell, and fell far. The Terran hegemony was lost to history, and so was hundreds of years of military innovations. From the time of the First Succession War through to the Third, even industrial capacity was reduced to such an extent that warfare amongst the stars was becoming increasingly impossible. With this in mind, there were still teams of people who traveled across the heavens seeking lost tech archives in order to bring back some of what had been lost, as if they were looking for the embers of the fires of Prometheus to light mankind's way back towards some level of prosperity, or to turn that fire into a weapon once more. Fate would have it that the gods smiled upon the Federated Sons, or at least researchers and explorers who worked for them, when they unearthed the remnants of an SLDF military facility on an as-of-now unknown planet. Star League-era discoveries of a military origin always garnered interest, especially when it took on the form of a 100-ton assault mech. For you see, the Sons didn't merely stumble across any cache of wonders from a bygone era. They came across the very prototype of the Titan that had once been presented to Alexander Kerensky. This was a discovery that took place just at the right time too, that being the year of 3023. The Sons had only recently established the NAIS, otherwise known as the New Avalon Institute for Science, and they had recently begun the process of allying themselves with the industrial and economic juggernaut that was the Lyran Commonwealth. If there was ever a time for such a discovery to take place, it was this exact window. With the NAIS they could, and did, reverse engineer the design, and with Lyran industrial capacity, they could have a new powerful mech to line up against their enemies in the Capellan Confederation, Draconis Combine, and Free Worlds League. Strangely, this was the road untraveled. The Federated Sons themselves evidently considered it unfeasible to begin producing this ancient wonder, in spite of its lack of Star League-era lost tech components, and this was from either a lack of ability to do so from within their own realm, or from a lack of desire to do so. On the face of things, this seemed to be an odd decision, until one digs a bit below the surface. Even though it had the reputation of being a Lyran favorite, the AS-7D Atlas was in reality a Davion staple in their assault mech formations, and was manufactured in their own realm. Effectively, they already had their own 100-ton Titan, and one which was tried and tested. They simply didn't need this discovery. It was redundant and costly. It seemed as though the mech, regardless of it being excavated from its tomb, was still functionally buried. Much like when the Star League had developed it, its window for usefulness in warfare simply passed it by, leaving it as a relic of a bygone age. Perhaps if it had been found in the Free Worlds League, its fate would have been different, though sadly, it was just not to be. Fate didn't entirely turn away from this fallen Titan though, because another player became involved in the discovery, one based in the Lyran Commonwealth's private sector. Vest, or Vining Engineering and Salvage Teams, was a company, a mech design house in fact, founded by an NIS graduate, one Dr. David Vining. Considered an engineering genius by Intersphere standards, he had formed his company in the years leading up to the clan invasion in order to put his talents to use generating personal wealth in the arms trade. Fascinatingly, Vest had very limited physical production capacity, and intentionally always would, if for no other reason than that they were in a different game than almost every other entity in the manufacturing space. They didn't see value in building mechs outside of unique models, They instead saw value in designing them. Vest was also unique in that as soon as the clans invaded, and the quality of their technology was discovered, they deliberately went into harm's way in order to unveil everything they could about these new, highly advanced, yet alien battlemechs. Members of Vest, including Vining himself, were more than willing to go to the front lines even, where they observed the enemy's machinery in action, and participated in battlefield scavenging, capturing clan weaponry and components for study, as well as obviously documenting what they saw these cutting-edge mechs doing as well. As soon as Vest and their crew members returned to the safety of Lyran space, their designs changed radically, taking into account just how these clan mechs operated, and trying their best to take what strengths they saw and injecting them into inner sphere battlemechs, or building inner sphere mechs as a direct counter to these dangerous enemies. Dr. Vining and his company, through the knowledge he'd gleaned from his time at the NAIS, had some indications that there was a design within the archives of the Institute that could be put to good use by their private venture. The Federated Commonwealth, the union of House Davion and Steiner's realms, also gave Vest free access to the ancient, unused Titan in their repository of scientific oddities and wonders. No claims were apparently ever made on any of the mech's proprietary structural components or technologies, meaning anything that came of it was truthfully their own development, legally speaking. The first mech to emerge from Vest's observation of clan weaponry in action was the Jackal in 3052. What's surprising is that Vest, despite being situated in House Steiner, and being a company run by an NIS graduate, didn't find a home for their mech within the Federated Commonwealth. Neither Steiner nor Davion partnered with them to take the design. Instead, this new light mech was picked up for co-development with Earthworks' Marik division on Keystone. This was the beginning of a partnership that combined everything needed to play a major role in the massive industrial and military shifts that were happening in the Inner Sphere. It was also the last piece to a puzzle, and the long road taken from 2765 through to the middle of the 3050s. It was as if one foot stepped out of the grave that was Tartarus, for a Titan that had been locked within it. Now Iapetus took to wife the neat-ankled mad Clymene, daughter of Oceanus, and went up with her into one bed, and she bore him a stout-hearted son, Atlas. Also she bore very glorious Menoetios and clever Prometheus, full of various wiles, and scatterbrained Epimetheus, who from the first was a mischief to men who eat bread. For it was he who first took of Zeus, the woman, the maiden he had formed. But Menoetios was outrageous, and far-seeing Zeus struck him with a lurid thunderbolt, and sent him down to Erebus because of his mad presumption and exceeding pride. Hesiod's recounting of the sons of Iapetus. There is one final contributor to the story here, one place which is indispensable, and before we look directly at their contributions, I wish to give a broader view of them to you, to help frame why this became the home of the Titans. If there was a realm of chaos a Tartarus made manifest, perhaps it would have been the Free Worlds League. Fittingly, it was the oldest of the great houses, even older than the long-dead regime of the failed Terran Hegemony, because in the beginning, there was always chaos. Despite its age, and regardless of the failings of House Marik, the ruling family of the League, being incredibly cutthroat and aggressive in their own politics and ploys for power, in many ways, the Free Worlds League had always been a second-rate power among the military superpowers in human space. While it had a vast array of resources, in human, industrial, and military capacities. It simply was not the size and scope of its primary rival, the Lyran Commonwealth. This didn't mean that the League did not succeed against its powerful rival, or its less powerful neighbor, the Capellan Confederation, but it meant that the League always seemed to be in the shadow of House Steiner in terms of their power and influence. Both powers were more economically oriented by nature, even explaining why Kenyan Marik, during the First Succession War, was the first House Lord to truly target economic infrastructure in the war deliberately, as he and his general staff recognized that war was a matter of logistics and economics, as much as it was about tactical military victories. This unfortunately set the tone for much of the vicious rivalry between the two successor states, though they had feuded far longer than just the Succession Wars. Sadly for the League, though, it suffered as all of the houses suffered during these tragic wars. What's more critical was the Free Worlds League was crippled in other ways too. Its system of government, as well as rampant corruption in the institutions and industries within the state, often acted as inhibitors to external success, or became accelerants to internal problems. By the time of the later portions of the Third Succession War, things were really beginning to show fatigue. Janos Marik ascended to the Captain Generalcy in 2991. The new Captain General entered politics with the idea of political reform, and also wanted to tackle the corruption choking the League's economy, bureaucracy, military, and intelligence services. His first act was to offer amnesty for political prisoners, including those who had recently schemed against his father's regime. And he also enacted legislation to provide additional aid to communities and individuals across the Free Worlds League. He toured his nation, much as the long-dead First Lord of the Star League, Simon Cameron, had toured the failing Star League in its twilight, trying to get a grasp on the problems that were now so badly eroding the realm's potential and prosperity. Janos tried to be a man of peace in these early years, even going as far as to state that military action should always be a last resort, a marked departure from his predecessors, and perhaps in some ways it was even an ill omen. He also went on to surround himself with, quote, the Council of Friends, unquote, highly qualified advisors set on reforms across the state. Typical for the Free Worlds League, and terribly for Janos, things didn't go as planned. From a youthful, hopeful young leader, Janos became an overworked, depressed, bitter man. This was forged by his misery, as he was struck with repeated personal and professional tragedies. Most markedly, his first wife had passed away. When he remarried, his fifth child died shortly thereafter. Later, he would lose another child, Faith, to an overdose while she struggled with drug addiction. Conflicts that were inevitable, but planned thoroughly by the League, didn't bear fruit, despite major reforms within the Free Worlds League military to reduce nepotism and corruption. In 3014, long dissatisfied with his brother's rule, Anton Marik declared himself Captain General, igniting a devastating civil war. Influenced by Comstar's intelligence services, ROM, as well as by the Capellan Confederation, these two put in efforts to weaken or even subvert the Free Worlds League, and these two went on to accomplish these objectives to a degree of success. Anton inevitably lost the conflict, in no small part due to his betrayal of the Wolfstragoons, though his campaign damaged House Marik severely, inflicting deep wounds on it institutionally, as well as militarily and industrially. It would take decades for the country to recover, truly. The grimmest of ironies was Anton had been one of his brother's greatest allies when he first entered office. Janos had ironically once been a man of forgiveness and peace. That had already eroded away long before his brother's rebellion. After Anton's death, and after defeating the rebels, Janos ordered the execution of every leader that had rebelled against him, including one of his own sons, Gerald Marik. He was merciful no longer. The Fourth Succession War did the League no favors either, especially with it being on the losing side of it. Calls came to remove the Captain General after the catastrophe, even if the League's fate was not to suffer as badly as its allies, because it was yet another hit to their prestige. So weakened was the regime that the Duchy of Endurian seceded from the Free Worlds League even, starting yet another conflict. Janos, in the midst of this, suffered a debilitating stroke in 3030 and became unable to directly govern. There was a struggle for succession and power between Janos' sons, Duggan and Thomas, as well as his nephew Duncan. Endurian was slowly losing its campaign during this process, especially after Thomas took the reins of power, unofficially, while his father attempted to recover. Janos and Duggan Marik were assassinated in a bomb attack sometime later, while Thomas was badly maimed and disfigured by it. Duncan seized power, but died in his campaign against the Endurians. Later, Thomas returned, seemingly restored and healed by Comstar, where he thereafter became Captain General, though the figure that appeared to everyone was not, in fact, the real Thomas Marik. Later, this figure would be known as Thomas Hallis when he adopted one of his later wives' names. This man was a Comstar, or rather a Blakist operative, sent on behalf of the organization, and by the consent of the disfigured Thomas Marik, to rule in his place. But more importantly, he was to rule the League in such a way as to satisfy Comstar's interests. The League was in shambles, but this gave the body double opportunity to centralize power on himself, and he began the process of rebuilding the state. Though this was not in the image of what had once been, everything was streamlined for the purposes of Comstar. Rule was firmer, industries would grow larger, technology transfers took place as needed, and Comstar agents took up roles in various industries and institutions. The planet of Gibson itself, even, became a malignant canker inside of the League, as the Blakists increasingly secured their stranglehold on it, making it the epicenter of their influence within the state, outside of Thomas Marik and Thomas Hallis, the true and fake Captain Generals. The Blessed Order of Comstar during all this began to skim the Free Worlds League's production for their own purposes too, taking equipment, ships, battlemechs, and a host of additional resources quietly for their own purposes. This was only to accelerate with time. Though, even with all of this being the case, the once sick man of the Inner Sphere went from being a half-dead eagle to a blazing, burning phoenix, shining brightly against the backdrop of the Inner Sphere, and it was to shine even brighter as the clan invasion swept into its primary industrial and economic rival, the Lyran Commonwealth. As an important aside, Thomas Hallis, though again this was not his real name either, had a sickly son, Joshua, shortly after he took office and married. Joshua suffered from cancer, and a deal was struck between the false Thomas and Hans Davion. The deal was that Joshua would be treated at the NAIS in exchange for market access to the League's military surplus and arms markets. This was later formalized in an agreement. The flow of arms did indeed help the Federated Commonwealth, an enemy of Comstar, but it also resulted in a massive inflow of additional funds, only further allowing the League's ascension towards more power and wealth, of which some of it would inevitably flow into the hands of Comstar. By the end of the initial clan invasion, indeed, House Marik was beyond wealthy, even by Great House standards. The FWLM, or Free Worlds League military, was able to be refit with the best the Inner Sphere could offer, and other developments too were positioning the League to become the dominant power in its local region. And this is where its improved relationship with the Federated Commonwealth bore fruit. Peaceful economic ties with House Steiner Davion during the invasion meant that increased cooperation was possible with many of their mech manufacturers and designers, including the experienced and talented people at Vest. In 3052, the Free Worlds League branch of Earthworks produced the Jackal on Keystone. Strategically, the Free Worlds League needed more than light mechs though, if they were to match their neighbors, and especially House Steiner. Traditionally, the Lyran Commonwealth was always able to produce more battlemechs than the League, and yet more grimly still, they produced heavier, often better quality machines than their Marik counterparts too. The gulf between the two states needed to be addressed. The Steiners built advanced mechs such as the advanced BNC-3S Banshee, as well as the mighty AS-70 Atlas, and did so in both cases in meaningful numbers. By contrast, the Free Worlds League constructed assault mechs like the Stalker, which, while impressive, was outclassed by these heavier, more armored machines. Of course, there was trade between the League and other powers to gain access to heavier fighting machines, though they could never match their opponents regardless, due to a lack of dependability around these exchanges. In other words, victories over enemies like House Steiner were born of tactics and tenacity, more than material superiority. But now their economy was booming. And now with their science, military, and industrial base flush with liquidity and experience, the League could finally redress the balance. Not only did they produce their traditional offering of mechs across League space, and more advanced variations of them, they now introduced a swathe of new chassis, all while doing massive expansions to production lines. On Irian, the most industrially important world in the League, for example, they built the new Tempest Heavy Battlemech, as well as the flawed 95-ton Albatross. Kaliyama domestically manufactured the Hercules, while Paradise went on to build the Wraith, and Gibson began production of the Hammer and Anvil. But the greatest of efforts seemed to have been made on Keystone, under Earthworks Incorporated. Notably, the planet of Keystone is industrially one of the most important planets in the entirety of the League, though it is overshadowed by Irian. Indeed, such efforts were made by the local planetary government and industries to increase output and production capacity, that pollution from their industries happened at such a scale that they caused the planet to eventually undergo an ecological collapse. This means most citizens, outside of artificial dome habitats, now need breathing equipment to survive the industrially poisoned atmosphere on planet whenever they are outside, and often even when they are inside many of the factories left outside of protective structures. So, in other words, on this planet they didn't just begin producing the Jackal, they also expanded into building the Apollo Medium Support Mech, and finally, in partnership with Vest, after a very impressive sales pitch, they began producing their own domestic 100-ton assault mech, one meant to embody their newfound might and wealth. For you see, on Keystone, they began to build what Vest had dubbed the Grand Titan. The mech itself had been designed by Vest, using, of course, the base of the Titan for their new machine. In trials, in their attempts to showcase the mech to potential buyers and other manufacturers, Vining had put their updated iteration of the Titan against the legendary Atlas, where their traditionally favored Battlemech was taken apart piece by piece, and left as a charred, broken husk. The Grand Titan's foot crushed the skull of the Atlas in the final moments of the engagement, and this was enough to sell the design to Earthworks in the League. Extensive alterations were made to the machine's overall profile, but the core of the mech was still very much the Titan, just heavily altered. This process, however, did create a major controversy during the development and sale of this particular design, for you see, Vest had overpromised how heavily armed the Grand Titan was to be, making several major defects, and they had to re-engineer the mech, but failed to update their marketing. Thus, the final product wasn't exactly what they had promised to their partners and clients on Keystone. The changes didn't alter much in the grand scheme of things, and production moved ahead on the TIT N10M Grand Titan by 3054. The new platform had been engineered and envisioned as being a cutting-edge weapon of war to strike down not only older or more poorly thought-out assault mechs from the Inner Sphere, but it was also intended to be in combat with clan chassis as well. The Grand Titan was a promise of everything the League desired. Their military would gain an asset to thrust at their Steiner enemies, if needed, or it could be used to bludgeon their Capellan. quote, allies, unquote, should their fragile relationship break down. In addition to that, were the clans to become too successful, ideally they thought this new, titanic 100-ton monster would be enough to stop them dead in their tracks, as a part of an overall force, of course. Grand Titans began walking off the assembly line, finally breathing life into the successor of a mech that the Star League had rejected centuries ago. The Free Worlds League military bought up as many as Keystone could produce. They prioritized its deployment first amongst their supposedly most premier unit, the Knights of the Inner Sphere. Other units eventually saw these gigantic, powerful war machines enter service once the Knights of the Inner Sphere received their allotment. However, there were others who would come to acquire the Grand Titan in its early days of development. And unfortunately so, at that. The stellar attributes of Vest and Earthworks' powerhouse also made its adoption by the League and Earthworks very fortunate for another entity, namely, the Word of Blake. Comstar fractured shortly after Tukiad into a secular entity, a more traditional, though radical, religious-oriented series of sects known as the Word of Blake. Both Thomas Hallis and Thomas Marik, tragically for the Free Worlds League, were dedicated members of the latter. Indeed, the Word of Blake officially sought refuge within the League itself, while it was exiled, briefly, from Terra. They also happened to take possession of the HPG grid within the League, giving them control over interplanetary communications. From here, not only did their agents continue their work in infiltrating the state further, they also procured many Free Worlds League battlemechs, including the Grand Titan. Not long after its adoption by both powers, its mettle would be tested in real fighting across the Inner Sphere and beyond. An assault mech weighing in at an impressive 100 tons, the TIT-N10M Grand Titan is the ultimate expression of the economic, industrial, and military expansion of the Free Worlds League in the years leading up to, and just after, the clan invasion. This Earthworks Incorporated product employs the most advanced technologies available to the Inner Sphere in its time of production in 3054, and represents an impressive, though in some ways flawed, brawling assault mech. To begin our examination, let us start by looking at its most basic physical features. It possesses a Saurian Model 101 BLP endosteel internal structure and chassis. This weighs in at only 5 tons, but it does take up additional vital critical space on board. Weight savings are essential with the overall plan behind the mech's purpose and construction, however. So this is an unfortunate, though necessary trade-off. After this, it has a standard gyro and cockpit. To keep the platform running cool, the Free Worlds League opted to use double heat sinks, of which the Grand Titan has 12. This isn't wholly adequate to the heat load that the machine will routinely be under though, and it is in all likelihood the biggest weakness on the mech overall. Though to say that it is crippled by this shortcoming would be incorrect. It's simply something that must be monitored and adjusted to. When we get into its electronic components, the 10M is served by a Hartford JEA-1 communications package, as well as an OP Firefeed 201 with Artemis 4 fire control system interface. More specifically, this describes its targeting and tracking system. The latter of these components confers the Grand Titan, in the advanced rules, a multi-track trait, which can be very powerful when dealing with multiple enemies at once. Finally, it has the difficult-to-maintain quirk in advanced campaigns, which for its time of introduction, and even eras that followed its initial deployment, makes perfect sense. Traditionally, most 100-ton designs lean into the use of a 300 standard or even a 300 XL engine. This gives most breakthrough mechs the ability to move at about 54 kilometers per hour, and it is considered to be the best performing engine, per ton, for a machine in this weight range. The N10M takes the bold approach of doing away with this limitation, and instead installs a massive 26.5-ton LTV 400 fusion extra light power plant, giving the Titan a maximum speed of 64 kilometers per hour. This is the same level of mobility expected for most mechs 25 tons lighter than the Grand Titan, and it gives it a high level of flexibility in terms of its ability to generate defensive movement bonuses, or to close with, or to exploit enemies that are caught out of position. Positioning and agility are very powerful on the battlefield, but the ability to do this doesn't come easily. In terms of cost, it is exceptionally expensive to build engines to this quality, driving the Grand Titan's cost per unit to a very high level on an already expensive chassis type. In addition to this, XL engines make Battlemechs more exposed to engine death in the heat of battle, and this also has to be taken into account. In other words, the Grand Titan does suffer in terms of durability, should its hardened outer shell be breached. There is somewhat of a stigma associated with this engine in some roles as a result, but on a well-designed mech, an XL engine will yield far more benefits than their drawbacks. In the case of the Grand Titan, it is built to get into engagement range as quickly as possible, and to use its mobility to hunt and slay mechs of the same weight range. It also allows it to more easily bully heavy mechs too. As a whole, it is the right, though still a controversial choice for the Grand Titan. There are multiple advantages to being extremely heavy. One is increased internal structure points, and another is the ability to apply a huge volume of traditional armored protection. Being 100 tons, obviously the Titan benefits from the former. In terms of the latter, it has 18 tons of Duralex heavy standard armor plating, yielding 288 points of protection, which is very much impressive and worthwhile. The Grand Titan has also been given the advantage of having an anti-missile system. This helps the mech deal with incoming missiles, letting it reduce the effectiveness of strikes on the mech from SRMs and LRMs most particularly. In later eras, once Thunderbolt missiles begin to appear, the value of an AMS does increase, as there is a real chance of the system simply shooting down a large, high-impact missile altogether. The biggest drawback and oversight in terms of the 10M? This particular Grand Titan lacks a case system, making it more likely to be catastrophically lost upon its ammunition being struck. Offense is truly where the Grand Titan tries something new, compared to most contemporary mechs designed between 3050 and 3060, in that it leans heavily into pulse weaponry and short-range missiles. Compared most frequently to mechs like the Atlas, the TIT N10M Grand Titan is a very different beast, not only in terms of its protection and mobility, but in the nature of its firepower as well. Instead of investing in a single large system to break through enemy plating, such as a Gauss rifle or autocannon, the Titan uses twin inner sphere diverse optics Type 20 large pulse lasers. These are found in its right arm. They have a slightly superior range to an AC-20, but benefit massively from being far more accurate than a ballistics weapon in the same weapons area. Their downside? They do just shy of 10 points of damage, which is a vital level to break through to. But when these weapons pulse per turn, it can lay down the foundations of significant armor breakthroughs in enemies all the same. After this, divided between its two right arms, the Titan installs two diverse optics medium pulse lasers, which are great for when the mech closes into its ideal range. Accurate and providing reasonable damage, these are great at searing into enemies' armor. These also pair well with its large pulse lasers in short bursts to breach armor, or when it is not using the large pulse lasers, in order to try to pair these with its other weapon systems to avoid overheating. Next up, it has twin Holly SRM-6 racks with Artemis 4 fire control systems, and 1 ton of ammunition dedicated to each launcher. These hit very hard, and provide short-range shotgun blasts into enemy targets, which are excellent for crit fishing. Anything the large pulse laser opens up, the SRMs will find. In addition, they are great at TAC fishing on their own, or for seeking out headshots. These are split between the Titan's right and left torsos. For its frontal arc, The last piece of this puzzle is a long-range harassment system that comes in the form of a Holly LRM-15 rack. This too has an Artemis 4 enhanced fire control system. LRM-15s are excellent weapon systems. This is just a very lonely component to engage targets with at long range, firmly placing the Grand Titan into being a short-range fighter as a result. The LRM launcher has 2 tons of ammunition overall. The missile tubes are also, I should mention, located in the left arm. The final systems on board are a pair of diverse optics small pulse lasers, both of which are directed towards the rear. These are there to dissuade back attacks or to target enemy infantry that may be ambushing the mech. Overall, while the Grand Titan runs hot potentially in close, its weaponry is well placed to allow it to succeed against almost any target, especially of an inner sphere variety. Where it struggles is in its long-range bracket, and this should be avoided at all costs against peer-level adversaries. The Titan in its original form is a mech that pays a price for it to be what it is. Most inner sphere battlemechs, in fact, have to compromise somewhere in order to achieve their primary role. For the Grand Titan, to achieve speed, it needs to use an XL engine. Its own mass, in and of itself, does offer it some form of protection, admittedly, but this also costs it in terms of its engine's tonnage. Finally, for its weaponry, it has an impressive array of accurate lasers and damaging missiles, but lacks a true knockout weapon. Still, it all comes together in a very impressive package overall. In close, it is an endurance fighter that strips down its opponents turn after turn with missiles and pulse lasers, before its SRMs inevitably begin striking exposed gaps in its enemy's armor. Or it simply uses its size to bully and kick the legs off enemy mechs. This is enhanced with its overall move rate too, making enemy assault mechs vulnerable to it outflanking them, and mechs that move at a pure speed will be outmatched by its armored protection and still meaningful arsenal. The Grand Titan, when it was first introduced in 3055, was the premier assault battle mech of the Free Worlds League, and its power and grandeur for its time cannot be overstated. Wherever its feet took it, it brought the true military power of the Mariks themselves. Men say that Typhon the Terrible, outrageous and lawless, was joined in love to her, the maid with glancing eyes. So, she conceived and brought forth fierce offspring. First she bore Orthus, the hound of Geryones, and then again she bore a second, a monster not to be overcome and may not be described, Kerberos, who eats raw flesh, the brazen-voiced hound of Hades, 50-headed, relentless, and strong. Hesiod, in his description of the offspring of Typhon. The consequences of the clan invasion in 3049 were immense for the entirety of human space. One of the biggest responses to this shocking military campaign, though, was how it transformed the Free Worlds League. As mentioned prior, the distribution of war materials throughout the clan invasion had enriched the state, but more so than that, it allowed for the League to become the preeminent source of advanced technology within the Inner Sphere. This was only further bolstered by their Blakist allies and their contribution to the state's industrial and research centers. In the years that followed the initial invasion too, the League's output to other nations continued to be more than significant, due to, if anything else, rising demand. One could even say that the peace between the League and the Federated Commonwealth, as well as the vital trade in advanced materials, was of such importance that the Steiner Davions would do anything to maintain it. Their security utterly depended upon it. Not only did they need the war materials from the League to rebuild and reinforce the AFFC, they also needed to secure the marches that connected the two halves of their multi-nation state. It turned out that this would cease being possible and it was discovered that Joshua Marik, by July of 3057, was in fact dead, and had been replaced by a body double in order to deceive the false Captain General, who was also, ironically, a body double. The Commonwealth attempted to cover up the young man's death in order to keep their agreement in the most maximalist way continuing with the Free Worlds League. The consequences of this decision were disastrous for the Inner Sphere. Coordinating with the Capellan Confederation, the Free Worlds League would launch a major campaign against the Federated Commonwealth in order to reverse the losses of the Forced Succession War. During the years of economic growth, the League's military had been far from idle. Indeed, the forces of the Free Worlds League military had been outfitted with superb, highly competitive equipment. Their soldiers and mech warriors were put through rigorous training in order to maximize the advantages they had been given by their new gear as well. When the League clashed with the armed forces of the Federated Commonwealth, it became clear quite quickly that the state which had borne the brunt of the clan invasion was not in a position to halt the juggernaut that was their Marik adversaries. Reclaiming lost worlds in order to punish the Archon Prince for his deception, the League went on to proclaim victory, as the Sarna March that they and the Capellans had just struck collapsed into what was termed the Chaos March only a short time later, pushing much of the center of the Inner Sphere around Terra into complete discord. In the aftermath of his successful attack, the False Thomas would come to an agreement, reluctantly, with the newly proclaimed Archon Catherine Steiner Davion. This short campaign was the first true military action the League had seen in a generation. It was also the first real blooding of their new, prized Battlemechs. Their impressive arsenal included the mighty Grand Titan, though in after-action reports of the fighting, there wasn't much to go on. Why, may you ask? Because Operation Guerrero, though very significant politically and strategically, didn't last particularly long. Engagements, while brutal in some instances, were more often than not one-sided as the League simply bullied its way through the AFFC defenders, who weren't in a position to do much to stop the Marik advance. There were of course exceptions, but even when their opponents stood and fought valiantly, inevitably they were either pushed out of position or crushed, if only by the superior numbers on the Free Worlds League military side. In other words, even though these mechs were put to use, the fighting simply didn't give an accurate assessment to its real combat capabilities in a major campaign. There was one takeaway from the campaign for the Grand Titan, however, in that it was felt that the mech lacked long-range engagement capacity. Objectively looking at it, this was very much true, so the Free Worlds League did configure and produce a second variation of the Grand Titan for further development, which arrived in the form of the TITN-11M. This was very much a mech ahead of its time, which is perhaps not the best endorsement of its configuration, but it was intended to fix real problems with the original N10M. Though in the wake of Guerrero, there was a real opportunity to see its fighting prowess, and in a much more direct and protracted series of battles in 2 campaigns. The Winning Conference of 3058 re-established a major lost institution amongst the Great Houses, with the primary collective objective to turn their united might against the clan menace. This was, of course, the re-establishment of the Star League, the union of the Great Houses which had been shattered centuries prior. A military counteroffensive was planned and was divided between Operations Bulldog and Serpent, and all of it was targeted towards Clan Smoke Jaguar, both in its occupied territories in the Draconis Combine, as well as their homeworld assets. The new Star League Defense Forces were to put an end to the clan threat once and for all, by making an example of the supposedly most powerful clan to invade their territories. For the Grand Titan and the Free Worlds League, there were truly 2 stories to tell that came about because of this. Within the Inner Sphere, as a part of Operation Bulldog, the Free Worlds League military and the Grand Titan performed exceptionally well by most accounts. House Marik contributed 3 regiments to the overall action, all of which were of high quality. The 1st Fusiliers of Oriente, the 1st Regulan Hussars, and the elite 1st Free Worlds Guards all had major showcases to make during the campaign, fighting across a half-dozen worlds throughout the multiple waves that crashed into the Clan Smoke Jaguar's Tumen. Fighting alongside their as-of-now decades-long allies, the Draconis Combine, the FWLM Expeditionary Forces blunted the Jaguar's counterattacks, and struck hard at the clan forces defending against the Inner Sphere's onslaught. The Grand Titan performed well within the FWLM, and so did their export models, which were serving within the Draconis Combine Mustard Soldiery during the struggles as well. Indeed, the campaign saw an enormous favorable exchange rate of material and manpower in favor of the Star League Defense Forces. Because of their lack of use of proper defensive tactics during this torrent of strikes, the Jaguars, regardless of their status of being defenders, were crushed at a 2-to-1 ratio by the Inner Sphere. And this was utterly catastrophic for the clan now being put into its death throes. By November 1st, 3059, no Jaguar forces remained in the rightful territories of the Draconis Combine that they had once occupied. This demonstration of the Grand Titan's effectiveness in battle can't be understated, as it played a key role in several formations that saw intense fighting. By participating in the campaign, it proved that Earthworks' 100-ton monster could do what it promised to do. Though its performance on Huntress, with Operation Serpent, perhaps balances the scales a bit more, and not in a positive sense. Because elsewhere, the Free Worlds League's supposedly most premier unit, notably being a creation of the false Thomas Marik, and the one which used the Grand Titan in great numbers, the Knights of the Inner Sphere, had a less than spectacular combat performance on the Jaguar's homeworld of Huntress. Attempting to reduce the savagery of their own side, the Knights of the Inner Sphere led by example, and that meant running into a brutal series of battles on the surface of the planet, where they were to suffer immense losses against newly formed Protomech formations put forth by the Jaguars. They also suffered at the hands of traditional Jaguar forces as well. By the end of their tenure on Huntress, the Knights of the Inner Sphere had taken over 50% of their forces killed in action or irretrievably lost, plus even more wounded. The Comm Guards even arrived to reinforce them against the fanatical opposition they'd been put up against, eventually turning things in favor of the Inner Sphere, but only after orbital support was finally called in to rain fire and death from the skies. In all likelihood, the poor tactics and strategies of the Knights were as much to blame for the debacle as their equipment, as eventually the Jaguars were crushed when more ruthless and effective forces took to the field. However, it cannot be stated that this campaign covered the Grand Titan or its operations in glory. Serpent would almost run out of steam before the arrival of Task Force Bulldog, which then merged the two operations strategically, and shortly later the Great Refusal was to be waged, and won against the clans. This was to be the last great hurrah for both the League and the Grand Titan in the 31st century, because what awaited them in the decade that followed was nothing short of a catastrophe. Built in response to pilot feedback and criticism around the Grand Titan's lack of powerful long-range weaponry, the TITN-11M Grand Titan somehow created one of the most non-solutions to the real problem brought up by the pilots. In fact, this is one of the most non-solutions really possible. First introduced in 3058, this poor, unfortunate 100-ton Battlemech falls victim to the greatest blights to impact the Free Worlds League mech's designs from the late 3050s into the early 3060s. But let's first establish the mech's fundamental components, before we rip it apart. It retains an endosteel internal structure, standard gyro and cockpit. It also retains its traditional 400XL engine, still letting the mech accelerate to 64 km per hour. It also goes on to keep the original 10M's armored protection of 18 tons. So where are the changes? First of all, it has a greater cooling capacity, with it having 16 double heatsinks, letting it vent 32 heat per turn. The mech also adds in a Guardian ECM, giving it an invisible layer of protection, as well as a much-needed case system, helping save the mech from being catastrophically lost should its ammunition magazine be hit, though to be clear, it will still likely be knocked out of a battle due to engine death upon its ammunition being detonated. And now here we are. We're here to show where the biggest changes begin, and where things begin to fall apart. Let's start with the most painful one. The Grand Titan N11M installs a light Gauss rifle into its left arm. This 13-ton weapon system, including its ammunition, can reach out to extreme distances, but hits with the full force of a 5-ton large laser. It is far from an actual upgrade over the original LRM-15 with Artemis 4 fire control system that the N10M brought to the field. And it weighs more too. To back this system up further, it has a right arm mounted ERPPC, which, while better, means that this mech spends 20 tons on long-range systems to get a marginal upgrade over the original's 9-ton investment. Basically, this mech pays twice as much in order to get a fraction more output, on average, at long range. And it doesn't even have the ability to head-clip targets either. What else remains, though? Well, it has 4 medium pulse lasers divided between its 2 side torsos, as well as 2 SRM-4 streaks, once more, shifted between the 2 sides. This is still decent and close, to be sure, but it does beg the question on if this mech could be better served by simply replacing both the ERPPC and light Gauss rifle for just a regular Gauss rifle and even more weaponry, or even enhancing its SRM streaks by upgrading them to 6s with the tonnage left over from this transition. Finally, it does have an emotional support ER small laser in the head. The N11M's close-range fighting ability is actually still quite good, and in some ways even surpasses the original. The real problem is, it spends a huge volume on tonnage trying to be effective at long range, and just isn't. So, it doesn't sacrifice much on the close-range front really, but its long-range fire is not really improved in any meaningful way. The light Gauss rifle is truly an enemy against effectiveness or even decency. It is one of the greatest technological cul-de-sacs ever discovered. Item 2. Dissolution of the Free Worlds League, its governing bodies, and attached offices. Introduction is made by Speaker of the Parliament J. Howard. After welcoming the attending, he makes a personal statement, excusing himself for any sentimentality on his part. Speaker Howard is sure that it won't affect decisions in any way. An explanation of the matter to vote on follows. Speaker Howard likens disbanding the Free Worlds League to a, quote, slide into a dark abyss of greed, short-sightedness, and human incompetence, where it will crash upon several star leagues and the remains of common sense, unquote. Session continues with a pre-recorded holographic address by Captain General Corinne Marik, stating her personal position on the matter. Captain General is excused from the session due to important matters of state. Minutes from the last session of Parliament in the Free Worlds League. January 28th, 3079. It all been built on a lie. All of the prosperity the League had swam in since the clan invasion, and even slightly before, was anchored in the efforts of Comstar, and later, the Word of Blake's attempt to subvert the state at every level for their own gain. The economy had improved because it gave a greater base of support for their efforts. Their military had improved because it better served to protect the Word of Blake from outside intervention. The government had become more centralized and efficient because that better served the purposes of, once more, the Blakists. But there was a price to be paid for all these things. Every lie incurs a debt to the truth. The greater the deception, the greater the debt. For the Free Worlds League, House Marik, and the body double masquerading as the Captain General, debts were now set to be collected. The prosperity was already starting to unravel before the beginnings of the Word of Blake's crusade against the heathens of the Inner Sphere. Even though the Federated Commonwealth Civil War had ripped apart the remnants of the greatest power in the Inner Sphere, and with the troubles in the Draconis Combine, This left House Marik appearing as the greatest power remaining in human space, especially with their vast war fleet. This didn't stop the fact that all of the centralizing of authority on the Captain General's office at the expense of the Dukes and Counts of the Free Worlds League was beginning to come home to roost. Yet more problematic for the situation was that House Marik had become divided due to Janos Marik's children marrying into various lesser houses of the state. In essence, cadet houses of House Marik were being robbed of their status and power, and this was not something that could or would be tolerated. This was exaggerated when the fake Thomas did nothing to intervene on behalf of several of his supposed close relatives who were trapped within the Fedcom Civil War. Notably, that meant nepotism for himself with his own son's departure from life, but not nepotism for other powerful members of state. This could not go on for very long. During the late 3060s, the provinces and duchies that were resisting centralization began rallying around one Duchess Elise Roussette Marik, a granddaughter of Janos Marik. In 3067, she called for the end of Resolution 288, which would have seen Thomas Marik stripped of the title of Captain General, because it would have meant the end of the emergency that the Free Worlds League had been in for centuries. The effort failed, but this created a great debate that threw the League into a political crisis, just as the word of Blake began to move across the inner sphere. Just before the followers of the Master launched their insane plans, there was one more problem that emerged. The false Captain General had become disillusioned with the true Thomas Marik, the Master of the Word of Blake no less, especially once he learned the true depths of what he had intended to execute. The League's military, and particularly its navy, were heavily influenced by Blakist forces, as well as elements in almost every position of power inside of the League's society. As this cancer had grown, Thomas Hallis realized what was to come was a dark crusade against the rest of humanity. Having grown comfortable in his role as Captain General, this slowly shifted his perspective with time, and thus Thomas Hallis opted to resist the true Captain General's orders to fully support the Blakists. For his trouble, his fellow cultists revealed that he was in fact not Thomas Marik, and they did so to the whole world. This caused political chaos, and allowed for Paul Marik to step in and overthrow the false leader who had attempted to hold onto power. "Oh, Paul." Sympathy tinged Thomas's voice. "I'd hoped you wouldn't fall prey to him." "Wouldn't have learned the truth, you mean?" The gun shook as Paul vented his fury. "Wouldn't have learned of your treachery? You brought this on the League. You and you alone. Now, because you tore up the plan, we have to practice triage, sacrificing part of the League so that some of it will survive. Paul, Spare me your excuses, fraud. You were supposed to be his spokesman and agent in the Free Worlds, but you turned your back on him and Comstar." The confrontation between Paul Marik and Thomas Hallis. Atreus. The Free Worlds League. August 9th, 3069. Every citizen from here forth was forced to side with or against the word of Blake as they made their moves to truly capture every element of the state. The Knights of the Inner Sphere were murdered, as well as a multitude of politicians and leaders across the state that resisted their plays for power. The rule from Atreus became the rule of the cult. As their bloody campaign carried on, the enslaved people of the Free Worlds League resisted with greater and greater ferocity, fighting back against their unjust overlords. When the Word of Blake began to fail in their sinister venture, the wounds caused by their reign of terror were too much for the League to survive. The people, from the top to bottom of society, had been betrayed by both Thomases. The false Marik had lied to them, guiding them into the horrors of the Blakist era through his centralization of power, and through his guiding the state into the arms of the Word of Blake, The other, the true Thomas, had deceived them as well, and then shackled them into slavery for his fanatical cause. This ended up destroying the entirety of the political structures and societies they held dear for their own perverse vision of mankind. This then said nothing of those who further hid the crimes of this pair, even as Thomas Hallis tried to redeem himself throughout the burning of the fires he'd helped build the pyres for. But you may ask, how did this impact the Grand Titan? First of all, the mech served in the Knights of the Inner Sphere extensively and was used in the engagements they participated in. From the Word of Blake's ambush and massacre of their troops, through to their final actions against the Free World's Legionnaires, which had sided with the Word of Blake, where the last remnants of the Knights were massacred. In some ways, with the death of the Knights, some of the imagery of the Grand Titan itself, which had come to be most associated with the unit, died alongside them. The false pretenses of nobility were slipping away. The mech was also used extensively by the Word of Blake during their assaults across the Inner Sphere, often acting as the seat of power for percenters or demi-percenters as they led their troops into battle. Yet more fought alongside them inside of the units loyal to them within the Free Worlds League, such as the Legionnaires and others, as they lashed out at the rest of humanity. Some who stayed loyal to the principles of the League, or some who stood against these fanatics, which had sided with a madman, also found their way to the mech's controls. But it had very much become a titan of madness in this age of violent fanaticism. In the aftermath of the war, the variants of this 100-ton monster remained within the production lineup on Keystone, though the planet was no longer within the Free Worlds League. Instead, the Grand Titan became a more common sight inside what would become the Marik Stewart Commonwealth, the largest Free Worlds League successor state. This merged set of duchies and independent worlds were ruled by the last recognized Captain General of the now former Free Worlds League, Kareen Marik. The mech was exported as well, as the Commonwealth would need resources to rebuild its military power in the aftermath of the era of madness that had consumed them, and the Inner Sphere. In some ways, though, one might imagine this grandest of titans was tarnished in the nightmare they had all lived through. But inevitably, the power it offered was well worth the grim reminder of what it had been allowed to become. Though, this was not the only titan to make an appearance during this age of destruction, for the Word of Blake unlocked another titanic creation for their war against the powers of the Inner Sphere. The Word of Blake birthed a new titan for their holy war, but one which was a mirrored reflection of what had come long before the Grand Titan that was born of Earthworks and Vest. The TI-2P Titan II was a resurrection of the original Titan, though with a vastly superior arsenal of weaponry, built for the Word of Blake militia, and being distributed to trusted allies and mercenaries. These monsters strode across the battlefields for years, clashing with forces that opposed the theocratic regime of the Word of Blake. Fascinatingly, they were never deployed amongst the Shadow Divisions of the Word, putting into view that the Protectorate Militia and the Shadow Divisions were at odds with one another, as they began refusing to share resources at several points. Inevitably, when the Word of Blake fell, the Titan II and its production center on Epsilon Erdani fell into the hands of the Republic of the Sphere, a state that rose from the ashes of the conflict. With the fall of the Word of Blake across the entirety of human space, from the Free Worlds League to their Terran Protectorate, the Titanomachy of this age of mankind came to an end. But it was forever changed. First experimented with in 3075, the TIT-N14R Grand Titan is a Regulan attempt at building an artillery platform out of an assault mech for their use in the protracted civil war that emerged in the collapse of the Free Worlds League. It also earned the name Vengeance during this trial period. Designed in the top-secret Regulan facility known as the Tiger Valley, This mech is a radical departure from the original Grand Titan, because they opted to turn the Grand Titan into a bizarre artillery platform, but also because it was intended to use nuclear weaponry. To begin with, it downgrades its engine to a 300 standard, and then applies a thick coating of internal armored protection around it, reducing the chances of the internal system being critically hit. This also limits its top speed to 54 kilometers per hour, though in reality it's much closer to 43 just due to another factor. The extra internal armoring doesn't end there, as it applies to its gyro and cockpit, making the mech extremely difficult to quickly knock out. In addition to this, the 14R adopts a Cyclops' cowl to further improve its head armor, but this only appears in the advanced rules. The mech also applies a dramatically improved life support system too, giving it the corresponding quirk name, namely due to it being intended to carry at least one nuclear shell on a deployment. The Regulans, evidently, were not keenly interested in fighting fair, and the Princes of Regulus, who are the last powerful branch of House Cameron, are renowned for their love of such battle tactics. Lowering its mobility further, the Vengeance also equips hardened armor, giving it greatly enhanced protection, however at a very heavy tonnage cost. This was what I was referring to when we were talking about its maximum speed. Still, this cost is spent, given that the mech has 34.5 tons of armor, giving it 275 points of protection, which is, against most weapon systems, equivalent to 552 damage pips. Even its only real weakness, which are re-engineered lasers, would struggle to chew through this immense amount of defense. Between its internal armoring and external shell, arguably the Vengeance would have been one of the hardest mechs to destroy in history. Oh, it also has 2 jump jets to help its mobility, though these are frankly not spectacular or truly helpful to its mobility. So, what does it have left for weapons? It has a pair of Clan ER medium lasers with 1 in each arm. After this, the 14R has a thumper artillery piece in the right and center torso with 2 tons of ammunition, allowing it to either carry 40 standard rounds or to carry 20 standard rounds and a potential nuclear arsenal. The Vengeance never entered production. It was simply found that it was much easier to bring alternatives to a battlefield to let off nuclear attacks at their opponents. The 14R was over-engineered, overcosted, unnecessarily slow, and represented a truly misguided understanding of battlemechs. But if you ever see this prototype for any reason, remember, it may be packing a nuclear surprise. A sibling design, if you will, to the Grand Titan, and a successor once more to the original Titan 1, from the SLDF no less. The TI-2P Titan II was a Word of Blake militia attempt at holding on to their power and the face of the Shadow Divisions by having their own, exclusive, powerful battlemech. This eventual Republic machine is relatively simple in its construction, but devastating in its configuration. Opting to not overindulge in too many core construction costs in terms of advanced technologies, the Titan II has a standard gyro, cockpit, and internal structure. It also retains the original Titan's 300 standard engine, though it does indulge in double heat sinks, of which it has 18, letting it cool 36 per turn, and it will definitely need to do that. After this, it once more has 19 tons of standard plating, giving it the same protection as a standard Atlas. Designers also included case systems for ammunition on board. So, what's this thing packing? The answer? A lot. In the right arm, it starts with a Blankenberg Divine Wrath heavy particle projection cannon. 4 D-Plan M3 XR ER medium lasers follow suit, with 1 in the right arm, 2 in the center torso, and 1 in the left arm. Twin Helga Series 9-tube multi-missile launchers are then installed, and are divided between the right and left torsos, giving it either 18 SRMs to launch every turn or up to 18 LRMs, depending on the needs of the mech. This is then further aided by its ZT Triple Fire Streak SRM-6 that is found in the left arm too. It has 2 tons of dedicated SRM ammunition, and 4 tons of MML ammunition overall. Finally, it has an emotional support Cressley Optics ER small laser in the head. This is a horrifyingly powerful package of weaponry to face down for most mechs, even clan battle mechs. The only weakness this Titan faces is that it's not able to safely alpha strike such an immense package of weaponry, but if bracketed correctly and divided evenly, this monster will deliver immense hammer blows to enemy mechs at all ranges. This is easily one of the most simple and solid machines the Word of Blake put together, and there is a reason why its service continued under the Republic of the Sphere. There is a message from Lester Cameron Jones I thought you'd be interested in. Anson rolled his eyes. He couldn't think of anything the old man of the Regulant Vifes would have to say that he'd find interesting. All right, go ahead. In the interests of countering other powers that are gathering in the area, he has a proposal for you. He thinks it might be wise for you to make him your heir. Anson took his feet off the table and leaned forward. He thinks what? That he should be your heir. He laughed. For a solid minute he laughed. Lester wants to be my heir, does he? Good hell. He's finally gone delusional. Heir to what? What does he think I'll be leaving behind when I'm gone? An exchange between Captain General Ensign Marik and Cole Daggart, New Edinburgh, Stewart, the Marik-Stewart Commonwealth, May 22nd, 3138. The collapse of the Free Worlds League truthfully happened at the worst time imaginable, barring perhaps the earlier succession wars. The Republic of the Sphere rose as a major power in the center of the Inner Sphere, for instance, and began seizing worlds from any power that wouldn't be willing to concede them. The Silverhawk Coalition, many independent worlds, and the Marik Commonwealth, the primary producer of the Grand Titan, attempted to hold back the Republic's incursion into their realm, and even into the near abroad of what had once been their nation, but to no avail. They were all vanquished on the battlefield by Stone's Republic, and then forced into a humiliating capitulation. The Blakist reign of terror, and then the conflict with the Republic, unfortunately had left Keystone in a sorry state of affairs, with the primary earthworks facilities on-world for mech production being heavily damaged. This was eventually repaired, though the planet was for a time forced into pivoting towards civilian industrial mechs, especially after the Republic attempted to enforce its disarmament terms across the region, though this wouldn't last forever by any means, as by the turn of the century, the Grand Titan would return to some level of use, though not exclusively by the Marik Commonwealth. In fact, the Grand Titan became somewhat popular amongst officers within the Republic's own coalition, and by 3091, a new configuration, one which was exclusively done as a field refit kit, the TIT-N13M, came to life when one Major Al-Hawad of Stone's coalition had the mech rebuilt. From here, this particular Battlemech rapidly spread across the League as mechs were refit depending on the wants of commanders for their older Grand Titan chassis, as well as any new machines that might have walked out of Earthworks facilities on Keystone. The N13M overall is a very strange mech to simply be a standard refit, given the drastic changes the machine undertakes in order to be configured. This would require factory-level facilities to undertake, and there must either be refit sites or dedicated factories which would need to be involved to do this at scale, rather than simply having technicians perform this in local mech bays or dropships. Still, this innovative take on things breathed new life into the Grand Titan, and to the state that built it, but it was the last hurrah, or last charge, if you will. let's begin the journey to explore as to why. Some level of war existed between the former free world states throughout the years after the collapse of the League, with the most powerful being the Marik-Stuart Commonwealth, the Regulant Fiefs, the Duchy of Oriente, and the Duchy of Tamarind Abbey. These were also the ones all truthfully vying for supremacy to reform the League itself. These various successors to the Marik legacy, as well as one embodying the legacy of House Cameron of all things, simply couldn't put their differences aside to reunite once more diplomatically. And this left the region as a soup of chaos and violence, with battles happening even on the former capital of the League between the AMSC, the Army of the Marik-Stuart Commonwealth, and the Regulant Fiefs. This violence also put an end to much of the prosperity the League had become accustomed to. So typically, too, no one was able to gain enough leverage to conquer their peers and achieve a strategic victory. And thus, the chaos never truly ended. This benefited the Republic most, though it also gave many advantages to several other Inner Sphere powers and mercenaries, as League states exported their weapons to anyone who could pay, if for no other reason than their collective need to subsidize their own weapons development enough to potentially overwhelm one another. But this delicate balance, as the 32nd century continued to roll forward, started to shift. The Marik-Stuart Commonwealth, the union of the Marik Commonwealth and the Silverhawk worlds, became the strongest of the League's successor states, as mentioned prior, but so much so that it was thought that there was a chance it could reunify the former realm. Though this hadn't manifested into a reality, it drew attention to the oldest rival of the Free Worlds League, the Lyran Commonwealth. Allying itself with Clan Wolf, the pair of aggressive powers invaded the Marik-Stuart Commonwealth and Duchy of Tamarind Abbey in what was called Operation Hammerfall. The army of the Marik-Stuart Commonwealth was the last true remnant of the Free Worlds League military of old. It had excellent designs, such as the Anzu, Giuliano, and yes, the Grand Titan, and its soldiers were professional at their very core. But that just wasn't enough. Their mechs were outnumbered, and even their titans were outdone by superior clan technologies. The Duchy of Oriente used the crisis to rally support around themselves, more or less dominating the Marik-Stuart Commonwealth as it was isolated and then annihilated by the vicious invaders. What had once been the strongest military component of the Free Worlds League, its greatest industrial center, its economic engine, and its cultural heart, died. The last true stand was done by Captain General Anson Marik and his brave last defenders on Stuart, in his palace. Knowing he could have escaped, but choosing not to in order to send a message to the people of his realm and to his soldiers that followed him, Anson was killed rather than captured after brutal fighting on the planet. This was done to ensure that some remnant of the Marik Commonwealth lived on, at least in the hearts of its people. The corpse of the state was then dangled about by the clan invaders before they twisted it into their own image, creating the Wolf Empire in the occupied regions. Any organized resistance by the citizenry of the Marik Commonwealth was put down ruthlessly by their new overlords. If there was armed resistance, the punishment was beyond severe as well. Civilians throughout a 5-block radius of a location where an incident took place were dragged into the street and shot. Their bodies were left to rot in the open. Even more perversely, anyone who attempted to bury these bodies would be killed as well, for disrupting the message the wolves were leaving to the now occupied people. Just in case you were wondering, the wolves did not discriminate between men, women, or children either. With these acts of barbarity and extreme violence over time, the people were cowed and were left in shackles beneath the whips of their occupiers. The Marik-Stuart Commonwealth's destruction, and with it the death of Captain General Anson Marik, saw that the Marik's family rule over their ancestral holdings, the most ancient noble family in the Inner Sphere, vanished. And with it, so too did Earthworks' control over Keystone. While facilities on planets still exist, the Grand Titan was no longer their consideration, nor were other legendary machines they'd built from their facilities, such as the venerable Battlemaster. No, the Wolves repurposed this world and its industrial sites. Notably, this accelerated after they tore through the Lyran Commonwealth as their alliance fell apart. The Grand Titan became relegated to Sibco training academies, which were placed on worlds that had once been the center of the Free Worlds League military, like New Olympia. What mechs remained across the Inner Sphere, and particularly in the former and reborn Free Worlds League, would now need to scavenge for parts in order to continue to operate. The house that forged them was gone. Their fates seemed tied together as well. So goes one, so goes the other. A radically different variation of the Grand Titan, and a variant put into service in 1391 as a mainline unit, the TITN-13M Grand Titan, a variation made by the Republic of the Sphere and later adopted by every other operator to varying extents, is a deadly and powerful combatant, truly embodying its name, as it is both brutal and vicious in combat. To start with, the N13M retains the original endosteel structure. It also has, once more, an armored cockpit and gyro, and its gyro is in fact a heavy-duty one, making the mech much more durable when it is critically hit. It also has the original N10M's 18 tons of standard plating. Once more, its engine is downgraded to a 300 standard, making it more durable, but making the mech much slower. In addition, it has 3 jump jets installed, giving it an agility boost in difficult terrain conditions. Normally this configuration might pose an issue, but not in this instance, as the 13M is blessed with triple strength biomers, meaning if the mech starts overheating to the right temperature, it will begin to move faster, and its physical strikes will do significantly more damage. Speaking of thermal regulation, this particular Titan has 14 double heatsinks, letting it vent 28 per turn. So, with all of these factors in mind, by what means does the Grand Titan dispatch its opponents? First of all, it is covered in a variety of energy weapons, not only to do severe damage to its enemies, but in order to build up the heat needed for its fearsome primary form of attack. So, to begin with, it has a head-mounted small pulse laser, which is good for killing infantry and discouraging in-close attacks by lighter targets. It also has a pair of standard medium lasers, with one in each side torso. These are then backed up by a pair of ER medium lasers, with one in each arm. These are then shored up by an ER large laser in the left arm, which opens the door to it also having a heavy PPC in the same arm. The heavy PPC in particular is great because of its ability to head-clip targets. But funnily enough, these are not the Grand Titan's main weapons, for when the N13M is operating at the correct intensity of heat, with its TSM activated, in its right arm it possesses a sword. Swords are not normally the best melee weapons. They don't boost damage anywhere near as high as a hatchet, for instance, and they usually don't do enough to justify their cost, but they are very accurate as far as melee weapons are concerned. Well, my friends, with TSM activated, the N13M strikes with extreme accuracy for a shocking 30 points of damage per swing. This eclipses a heavy Gauss rifle in terms of its damage output, for instance. It also kicks for even more, if that is your preference. But the sword can strike a mech from any direction. Any direct blow from this weapon is an immediate crisis for the enemy pilot, regardless of the battlemech that they find themselves in. Altogether, the 13M is a survivable, brutal breaker of enemy battlemechs, and is a particular threat to anyone in the heavier weight categories that may struggle to keep distance from it. It truly does walk across the battlefield as if it was one of the titans of myth and legend, there to bring ruin even to the gods that sought to depose it. It was this burgeoning environment of resentment, as the glow of being named Ilclan faded, but Othar leaned into building his new empire clusters. As the word spread that he sought new warriors, Othar and Radu, together with warriors like Kylie, and with the support of the merchants under Hilda, continued to build up forces. Othar had an ambitious plan: raise 2 new galaxies to defend the Empire, Rufus and Lupus. To that he had to pray the Free Worlds League, Fontaine Marik, and the Lyran Commonwealth gave him time. Empire alone. With the strategic defeat of the Marik Commonwealth, and more importantly, the loss of Keystone, time began to tick down for the Grand Titan. By 3152, it had been approximately 15 years since its original production site had been absorbed into Clan Wolf. This didn't just mean the end of the mech's production in a direct capacity, it also meant the end of something far more vital: support parts and servicing. If a major actuator fails, will there be a replacement readily available? Often once these types of supply chain issues begin, mechs will start being cannibalized for parts as soon as supply stores run dry. Another reality is that some mechs, even if supply stores aren't empty, will be scrapped rather than repaired in order to once more harvest parts for other, still functional units. Mechs and vehicles like this can stay in service with these practices for multiple years, sometimes even extending into decades, but they are truthfully zombie machines. In other words, they are dead, but still walking. Every year since the loss of Keystone represents a year where there are fewer Grand Titans in service, and not just in the Free Worlds League, but anywhere they exported them to at any point. There have been some efforts on behalf of Earthworks in recent years to bring the design back to some level of prominence, but this process has been slow. Replacement parts are scarce, and refit and repair packages have been limited. More troubling for this project yet, many of its suppliers are within the Clan Protectorate. All the same, without Earthworks either greatly expanding their production capacity inside of one of their other facilities to include assault mechs, in order to actually build new Grand Titans from scratch, these mechs are still gradually drifting towards the abyss. The symbol of the now deceased and gone Knights of the Inner Sphere, and the symbol of House Marik's industrial military power, now erodes in real time, slowly and faintly becoming only a memory. Many mechs in the histories of the Inner Sphere have suffered such a fate. The Grand Titan is not the first, nor will it be the last. Unlike so many in the past, however, in this instance there is a shred of hope, and that hope doesn't just extend to itself, but there may even be hope for House Marik yet. House Marik, the real one, remained in control of the Duchy of Tamarind Abbey through Duke Fontaine Marik, though he is a man with no heir. Throughout a series of crises, the last Marik to hold meaningful power within the Free Worlds League's political structures has found himself embattled on all sides. The Steiners, which once held his capital world, had been pushed back, and the Duke pressed his advantage. For a while he even retook the long-lost and coveted world of Bolin. Unfortunately, fate was to be unkind to the Mariks once more, despite this triumph. From his periphery-aligned flank, the Marians invaded as a consequence, sensing an opportunity to expand their brutal, Roman-inspired regime's power. Fontaine managed to take charge in the face of this emergency, and pivoted to begin tackling this incursion. For doing so, he was censored and denied further military support. This tragic absurdity masquerading as politics was born of the Parliament, supposedly, though clearly was encouraged by the central government, given where the votes would have had to have come from, to isolate and punish the last powerful Marik Duke. Through cunning, strategy, and help from various mercenaries, the latter of whom he could thank Christopher Hallis Hughes for, Duke Marik of Tamarind stabilized his borders, and threw the last of the Marians from his ducal territories, showing him to easily be the most competent and aggressive leader left in the new Free Worlds League. In the midst of his successful campaign, He recognized that the Wolf Empire, depopulated of its troops due to Alaric's conquest of Terra, had to be overthrown. The Empire sat upon the most productive and important planets within the Free Worlds League, barring Irian, and it was of vital national interest that they be opposed and done away with. As a point of pride, too, they also inhabited the ancestral holdings of the true House Marik, and this humiliation would not last forever. If not for their own citizens living under the yoke of clan tyranny, then for their own essential economic, military, and industrial interests. The League, in essence, needed the Marik Commonwealth in order to survive over the long term. To be without it would expose the nation indefinitely to threats from the Wolf Empire, and eventually, even other successor states nearby. And Fontaine was not the only one to recognize this. The Covenant Worlds, one of the League's newest provinces, too broke with the central government of the League, beginning to move against the Wolves themselves. The Covenant Worlds were formed of former Republic holdings, and they had a long grudge. This was further enhanced by the fact that the now dead Warden General, Thaddeus Marik, had once been their leader, and it still had strong ties to the Rousset Mariks. Gavin Stewart, the rightful ruler of the world of Stewart, too made a move, along with the remnants of the Silverhawks, attempting to retake their ancestral lands. All of the actors who made these attempts were punished for insubordination by the Captain General in some way, by either not acknowledging their successes and attempting to reverse them, or by attempting to deny these various provinces the means of continuing their critical military operations in some way. Most absurdly of all, in the case of one Count Stewart, the Captain General even sought his arrest on the grounds of treason. Or worse, openly hoped for his destruction and the destruction of his unit at the hands of their enemies. I do not wish to cater to regiments that do not follow their orders, Johns. If the Griffins wish to face the wrath of the Wolf Empire, I am inclined to let them destroy themselves, and we will beseech Con Ward for leniency for their unsanctioned actions. He treated well with my mother, and our relations thus far have remained stable. I am sure he will see reason. Captain General Nicole Hallis, the Clan Protectorate, the planet of Marik, Free Worlds League Space, 6th of May, 3151. Unsurprisingly, this strategy on behalf of the central government and Captain General failed, and for a multitude of reasons. Without the central government, brave men and women took action at all levels of the military structures within the League. They knew their own duchies, personal holdings, and national interests were on the line, and not just in the immediacy, but in the years and decades to come. Knowing that the nation needed them to do something, these entities within the Resurrected League acted in defiance of the incompetence and inaction of Atreus. Planets were liberated, even if it took months to be recognized. Political outsiders and even criminals rapidly turned into heroes, if not officially, then of the people who demanded action not only to save their latest iteration of the state, then to save those who'd been left behind, trapped in Alaric's clan empire. This was demonstrated quite clearly when Parliament began to support Duke Fontaine and others in their attempts to recapture worlds lost to the Wolf Empire, despite protests being issued by the administrator above. Only after the window had closed for a quick victory has the League's central government finally chosen to act, as it was dragged kicking and screaming into the chaos that unfurled from its failed policies. Had it only not gotten in the way, perhaps the window of opportunity would have not so completely closed. Amongst this storm of chaos, every world taken is a step closer to the forges of Keystone. In the aging arsenals of the ducal armies of Tamarind Abbey, the Silverhawks, and the Covenant Worlds, old titans rumble to life at the call to war, to face down the enemies that had vanquished them a little over a decade ago. The remnants of the old fire of the Titans may not burn as hot, or as bright as it once did, but the Grand Titans of old are perhaps strong enough, along with the forces marshaled against the Wolf Empire, to retake the forge which had once hammered them into existence. Keystone is their Otheres. If it is to fall once more into the hands of the League, then perhaps the seals above Tartarus can finally be broken, and the Titans can be unleashed once more. And woe betide those who are numbered amongst their enemies. The TITN-20C variant of the Grand Titan came into existence in the aftermath of the reunification of the Free Worlds League. Notably, after the destruction of the Marik Stewart Commonwealth at the hands of House Steiner and Clan Wolf. While Keystone, the Titan's only production site, was locked away behind the Iron Curtain of the Wolf Empire, that didn't mean there weren't multiple examples of the Battlemech in various forms left behind inside of the new Free Worlds League, or taken as trophies by the Clan Protectorate. For the League, with the loss of the Marik Commonwealth, the reality was that they had to make do with what resources they had left to hand, as well as reinvesting in its remaining industrial capacity. Multiple Battlemechs saw updates as they were put into production elsewhere. For instance, the WVR series, once built on Thermopolis, a planet also held within the Wolf Empire, is now principally constructed on the World of Loyalty. This did not take place, however, for the Grand Titan series. While Earthworks Incorporated did retain multiple production sites across the now reformed League, none were set up as a major assault mech production site. That fact didn't mean that there wasn't still money to be made with older mechs languishing in arsenals and mech bays across the Marik's former empire, though. Many of these mechs would have been perceived as good enough for reserve or even frontline units in the FWLM, ducal militaries, or even localized mercenary forces. With expensive, powerful options out there for new procurements such as the Giuliano, and even its partial clan quality upgrade, Earthworks determined that there was still more than enough money in selling major refits to their now aging, unsupported Titans. In partnership with suppliers found in the Clan Protectorate, they went about crafting a refit and reimagining so potent that every local commander would be chomping at the bit to take their out-of-date Grand Titans to sanctioned refit supply sites to get their older machines in fighting shape for a new era of warfare. The ability to refurbish these battlemechs, though, may be short-lived, as tensions rise between the Clan Protectorate and other Free Worlds provinces. As of 3152, the partnership that allows for these upgrades to take place may have even halted. The N20C opted to be minimally invasive regarding the core components of the Battlemech itself in order to save on costs. Overwhelmingly, the Grand Titan and its variants retained their Saurian Model 101 endo-steel frames. In other words, they retained their standard inner-sphere endo-steel internal structures. It also retained the mech's onboard gyro and cockpit, seeing little reason once more to add additional labor and engineering costs to the refit's overall end price. After this, though, more significant changes began to appear. The mech comes equipped with 17 Clantech quality double heatsinks, letting it vent up to 34 heat per turn. There was also some debate about finding a way to include yet more heatsinks in the design, but it was discovered, much like in the days of the original Grand Titan's development, that there was simply not the capacity on board to make every possible design decision happen. This leaves this variant of the Grand Titan slightly undersynced compared to the demands of its new weapons loadout. For electronic systems, the N20C retains the original electronics package of the N10M, though there may be some software and firmware updates for them since their original inception. For the purposes of gameplay, the Grand Titan's latest configuration retains its original design quirks, which are multi-track and difficult to maintain. The latter most definitely makes an abundance of sense given the mech's current situation, and its new, limited iterations advanced components. the single most expensive piece of equipment in the entirety of the N-20C's refit package, and the piece that ensures that the Battlemech must be brought to a sanctioned supply site more often than not in order to do this extensive upgrade, is its new, highly advanced power plant. Replacing out its original extra-light LTV 400 class fusion engine, the N-20C instead installs a Clantech 400XL engine in its place. The tonnage is the same, but vitally the Clan quality engine takes up significantly less space in the Grand Titan's side torsos, and gives it the ability to potentially survive the loss of one of those torsos as well. In short, the Grand Titan's durability is greatly enhanced by its new engine in comparison to older models. In addition to this already substantial change in its build, a supercharger is then further installed, allowing the N-20C to reach speeds of up to 86 km per hour for short bursts. This translates into 8 movement points in the tabletop game. This not only allows the mech to catch its potential adversaries out of position, but gives it a distinct and brutal ability to flank standard heavy and assault mechs, if it can be positioned to do so. In addition to these offensive features, brief bursts of speed can also allow for the mech to more easily take cover, or to simply become harder to hit across open ground. There are drawbacks to this technology, particularly if a pilot uses it too frequently, as this can result in engine damage, but it is very much a key component in this upgrade's battlefield performance in the Ilclan era. Retaining the original's armor and placement of said plating, the N-20C is little better defended than the original N-10M. Indeed, one may argue that it is in fact less defended in one way, which is that it necessarily lacks an anti-missile system. This is somewhat offset by its more durable engine and its faster movement speed, both of which enhance its defensive properties, but it is necessary to point out all the same. There is one key advantage, however, that does make the Grand Titan 20C significantly more survivable, which is that it now has a Case 2 system installed to guard its ammunition stores. Case 2 is far superior to Case 1, and it can be the difference between a side torso being lost, or a mech continuing a battle, albeit with a rattled pilot. Overall, the N-20C is more protected than the original when taking all of these elements into account, but there was a trade-off to be made, rather than it just being purely enhanced over its original configuration. As one would expect, the N-20C's arsenal of weaponry is heavily modified from what came before. Taking inspiration from the original N-10M, and opting to modernize it with cutting-edge equipment, the results are very much solid, though not without a few notable drawbacks. Replacing out the original's large pulse lasers in the mech's right arm are a pair of Fusagon Smart-Tooth snub-nose particle projection cannons. These are then further enhanced with a pair of capacitors. Snub-nose PPCs are some of the best inner sphere weapons to be rediscovered in the 31st century, saving on weight in comparison to normal PPCs, yet still having excellent range brackets, including having an enormous close-range threat zone. The system's primary drawback is that it has a declining gradient of damage, the further away from the target that they are. The capacitors that are attached to these PPCs can be charged the turn before firing, and enhance damage for the twinned cannons. The best tactic around this seems to be to charge the PPCs before initially coming into close range, and then blasting a target with twinned blasts that discharge at the same level of force as a Clantech PPC, or as a Gauss rifle. This opens up major holes in enemy mechs, which can later be exploited by the rest of the Titan's deadly arsenal. If the capacitors are fired as often as possible though, notably, the mech will begin to suffer from heat management problems if they are paired with its other systems. Speaking of its other offensive options, found in the left arm, the N-20C once more replaces out the original's LRM-15 launcher and upgrades it to its Clantech equivalent. Notably, the designers had originally wanted to do away with the original's Artemis 4 fire control system, and had spec'd the mech around this reality. However, their Clantech suppliers gave them an offer they were unable to refuse, which was access to an Artemis 5 fire control system for the new LRM launcher. This came at the expense of some of the mech's cooling capacity, but greatly enhanced the machine's long-range missile system's ability to put missiles on a confirmed target. In other words, it will deliver more warheads on foreheads than it otherwise would without this upgrade. 2 tons of ammunition are provided for this missile system as well, giving it the staying power for 16 rounds of fighting, if used at every opportunity. This is considered more than adequate. After these primary systems, we begin to look into the follow-up weaponry that's still yet on board. A pair of Clantech ER medium lasers replace out the old medium pulse lasers that were once split between the 2 arms. These do superb damage and have excellent effective distance to engage targets, as they are in essence near-sphere large lasers, but they generate less heat and weigh 1/5 of the tonnage. They can either replace the snub-nosed PPCs when they are cooling down and recharging their capacitors, or they can add real strength to a much more enhanced level of fire from the mech, if it's willing to overheat. The last major offensive assets remaining are its upgraded Clantech SRM-6 Streak systems, which replace the original's SRMs with Artemis IV fire control systems. These, in essence, send out waves of shotgun blasts into enemy targets, and don't generate heat or expend ammunition if they fail to acquire a target lock. In addition, Streaks always hit with their maximum complement of missiles, making these extremely effective once an enemy's armor has been worn down. The last of this vicious arsenal is its most minor contributors to combat. It has 3 Clantech ER small lasers, with 2 in the rear torso and 1 in the head. The 2 facing in his rear direction help ward off backstabbers and flankers from behind, and the 1 in the head is a final backup weapon for when fighting comes in close, which for the 20C, it almost always should. In total, the N20C has a brutal close-range fighting package that, when combined with the mech's speed, can deliver vicious blows to enemy mechs, even heavier ones. Anything it cannot outrun, it can outgun. Anything it cannot outgun, it can outflank. The N20C is perhaps the last spark of life left within the Grand Titan, using multiple clan technologies and weapon systems to boost its performance. There is little that could be done to enhance it further, beyond beginning to replace the actual structural components of the Battlemech. In many ways, it fulfills the ultimate promise of the Grand Titan from when Vest advertised it to the Free Worlds League. It is quick on its feet, even being able to catch clan heavies unaware if they do not take into account its supercharger. It is also very heavily guarded, retaining its original armor complement, but goes even further by having its new engine and enhanced mobility to protect it as well. And its weapons complement, even if it might be inadequately cooled in order to use everything it has on hand with any frequency, if managed correctly, will allow this monster to rip and tear into its enemies, until it is done. Until the Grand Titan has achieved victory. The N20C is the ultimate expression of power for the Free Worlds League. It is also now their long-standing 100-ton monster. Sadly though, perhaps not forever, as even with this upgrade package, and the intention to restore salvageable frames to this new standard, should too many frames be lost, should Earthworks not restore a proper line to build new chassis themselves in full, then this is but the last gasp of an old warrior, going out on a high note for its last fight. Great Olympus reeled beneath the divine feet of the king, as Eros and earth groaned thereat, and through the 2 of them heat took hold on the dark blue sea, through the thunder and lightning, and through the fire from the monster, and the scorching wind and blazing thunderbolt. The whole earth seized, and the sky and sea, and along the long waves raged along the beaches round and about, at the rush of the deathless gods, and there arose an endless shaking. Hades trembled where he ruled over the dead below, and the Titans under Tartarus, who live with Kronos because of the unending clamor and the fearful strife. Hesiod describing Typhaeus. Present but forgotten. Those words encompass not simply the Battlemech known as the Grand Titan, but the people and entities who made it. Vest continues to operate on Solaris, though most of what they do now is more specialized. Their greatest contributions seemingly left far behind them. The facilities on Keystone are now not only outside of the reach of Earthworks Incorporated's proper body, within the Free Worlds League, but these mighty production sites now produce alien and foreign machinery for the masters of an outside empire. The Marik Commonwealth, once the seat of power within the Free Worlds League, and the master of politics, commerce, industry, and warfare within the greater state, are now but a footnote in history. The Free Worlds League, or at least its central administration, are so detached from the events within the realm they once commanded that they are forgotten whispers of a political entity, content to reside in the shadows of what they once were. And even then, often one might have forgotten about the League's presence in the aftermath of their implosion caused by Comstar and the Word of Blake, the ultimate betrayal it has never recovered from. Truthfully, in some ways the Free Worlds League was never really resurrected, despite parts of its corpse being stitched back together. Perhaps both it and the Grand Titan are dead. Both are merely the shambling corpses of things yet to fully pass from this life and to truly begin their journey into the next, where they can be left in the past. The League without its core region, and with it being in the hands of their enemies who will only grow in power with time, is a doomed League. Just as the Grand Titan without its factories is a doomed Battlemech. This Titan had been the League's champion, and its fate seemingly mirrors that of the state since its inception. It was the face of Thomas Marik's personal guard, the Knights of the Inner Sphere, a supposedly elite unit that went on to fight the clan wars. More importantly, it was a reflection of the League's rise to prominence, as it presented their power, wealth, and might. From there, it went along a journey with every citizen and noble alike, as they collectively took their catastrophic fall into the hell that was built up for them by the insidious creatures which had infiltrated and functionally destroyed their nation from within, from the top to bottom. Wearing the Grand Titan like a skin suit, it became an avatar for the Word of Blake. Afterwards, it was allowed to be the bold face of an assault wing in the army of the Marik Stewart Commonwealth, the true successor to the Free Worlds League military, at least until the creation of a newer, more advanced mech, the Giuliano. With the Commonwealth's passing, it has gone from greatness to weakness, prominence to obscurity. It is a reminder of what the League once had, and just maybe, what it might have again. In the dark days of the newly formed Ilclan, the lesser lords and people of the Free Worlds League can see a possibility of restoration, though they also see that the window of opportunity has almost closed. This has been as a result of clashes with their Captain General, whose policies have been, at best, not the right ones for the moment House Marik as a whole are in. These policies have distracted from the state's true enemies on all sides who are now weak enough to be put in their place. The Marian hegemony lay broken but unconquered, due to the League being unwilling to finish what the Roman-inspired Periphery Realm started, due to their own squabbling and foolish politics. The Wolf Empire sits atop the most prized planets of the Free Worlds League, barring the Gem of Irion. They have been protected behind an invisible wall erected by the Captain General's foolish mistakes, allowing them to rally some of their lost strength. They are not nearly the easy conquest they once would have been. And now the broken Lyran Commonwealth has been laid bare, with only one brave commander left to defend the entirety of its southern borders, sitting atop ancient claims of great value to the Eagle. Each one of these political and military opportunities, if not exploited, will come back to haunt the League in the form of being their future conquerors. Each one will be a spear to be thrust into the eagle in order to repay it for its indecision and mercy. Each will, in their own way, doom the nation. To not act is to condemn their people to chains, and their nobility to poverty, much as they had been condemned within the Wolf Empire. For you see, the Inner Sphere is a cruel and unforgiving dark forest, and this must never be forgotten. The ultimate sin is to be weak, but in terms of will, unity of power, and decisiveness. The time of the Titans came to a close in ancient Greek mythology when Kronos was defeated, along with his allies amongst his brethren. This was accomplished by Kronos' own son, Zeus, as well as his other children. These gods would later become the Olympians. Once entombed within the hell beyond hell that was Tartarus, their fate was concluded, and the vanquished were never seen again. They remained undying ghosts in another realm, unable to escape their suffering for their own misdeeds. The Grand Titan, too, seems to have been cast down, as its namesakes were once cast down. But despite this parallel, there could be a twist, a ray of hope. With every planet retaken from the Wolf occupiers on their way to Keystone, with it now within arm's reach of the forces arranged by ducal armies and patriots of the Free Worlds League in their attempt to retake the founding core of the nation, it may just be a story of resurrection and rebirth, a true one, not only to just bring about the rebirth of the Grand Titan, but to restore the country it fought for, since it was put into service in 3054. Perhaps the Free Worlds League itself will once more rise to prominence. What was may come again. The fates spin webs of men's lives, and evidently, so do they spin the fates of fallen titans. After all of these years of struggles, maybe the gods will take mercy upon their fallen brethren, and allow them to make their return to the top of the mountain. Unlike the titans of old, they may give a chance for this one last monster to claw its way back from the depths of history. Perhaps the gods will wish for the Grand Titan to be great once more, and once restored, perhaps the Grand Titan and the Free Worlds League will bring order where there is chaos, and will remake their corner of the Inner Sphere into the mighty state it once was. To get there, the last of the Titans and their pilots will need to give all in battles where their numbers will dwindle, possibly until there is merely only a handful remaining, drifting perilously towards the edge of extinction. However, should their struggle and sacrifice be not in vain, should the deaths of machines and mech warriors be found worthy of great Ares himself, in their displays of courage, all in order to achieve hallowed victories, then on the other side of all of this carnage, madness, and revenge, a bright future, as well as eternity and glory await. Onwards to Keystone, friends and countrymen. Onwards to victory. They wanted a speech. They wanted him to inspire them, to give this moment some meaning, damn them to hell. So, he spoke. I don't know if anyone will ever remember you. I don't know if history will record your names or tell your stories, or sing your goddamned praises, or any shit like that. And I don't bloody care. This isn't about history. This isn't about anything noble. This is about the Lyrans and Clanners on our soil. They will be coming through that damned door, and they will try to kill each one of you. This is simple. You are Marik troops. They are invaders. You will make them pay. Right now. There is nothing else besides this room. There is no massacre on Helm. There is no Commonwealth, no planet, no city. There is this room. This is our land. They are invaders. And they will damn well pay. Captain General Anson Marik rallying his soldiers. prior to their final stand against Lyran and clan forces. New Edinburgh, Stuart. The Marik Stuart Commonwealth. June 5th, 3138. I wanted to give you all an introduction to, and raise a little awareness around, one of the most rewarding projects I've participated in outside of my own channel. It was my honor and privilege to be involved in the first season of the Mechnificent 7, which is a role-play and gameplay series around the Destiny RPG system, as well as Battletech Aces. I got to be joined by a host of great people for it, including Jesse, Marianne, Randall, Josh, Tex, Sage, Paul, and Tommy. We had an adventure of subterfuge, intrigue, and combat, and throwing people off of buildings. Well, they have opted to do a second season, and I am amongst those returning for it. This time I was even able to be there in person for filming, rather than just contributing remotely. That's right, my plump persona went all the way to Ontario to film the second season on site. And while the travel was taxing, and perhaps at times I tried too hard while filming while exhausted, I also had an absolute blast playing it with a cadre of inspiring, creative, and gifted people. We all got to share a fragment of our lives in order to put something together to hopefully entertain people who love Battletech. For those of you who watched Season 1, things have changed a bit for how I'll be in the second season, and I won't spoil too much of it, but I had a great opportunity to portray some extremely fun, if completely deplorable people. I hope I don't make too many people mad with this interpretation of a character, but I do hope you all love it. I wasn't alone, of course, and was joined once more by Randall Bills, who played the stoic and ever-dangerous Jabal Arazad. Tex from the Black Pants Legion joined us remotely and played once more as Dr. Randolph P. Checkers. Paul from Friday Night Aces joined in as Gus Wiley Jansen. Tommy, the head of Six Sides, got in as Harlan Storm. Sage reprised her role as Kraitoson. Josh and Jesse play as the other side of the table, as our guides and adversaries. We've also got a new addition in this season in the form of Scott. By the way, watch for Scott's first appearance as Stojan Reg. It's absolutely spectacular. Everyone gets to play fun, and quite frankly, insane characters, doing enjoyable, yet also crazy things. I also do things to make the GM extremely upset a lot of the time, but that just is what it is. I'm sorry, Jesse. It's hard to talk further without massively spoiling things, but I think it came together fantastically. Even if you see me half-slumped in my chair a few times from exhaustion. I also wanted to let everyone know about this incredible series of videos, not just because I was in them, but because I think they deserve more attention. So I wanted to draw more eyes to it, but I am going to selfishly add that is because I get the opportunity to pilot the mighty Grand Titan within it, and I push this 100-ton monster to the absolute limits of what it's capable of within the Alpha Strike and Aces systems. We redline this thing through the entire campaign. It's hilarious. Were you aware of how much an Innersphere XL engine draws off internal structure pips for Alpha Strike? Oh man, I got to find out. But the damage was so good. Leveling other assaults several times was so satisfying. In fact, my time filming the second season inspired me so much that it was the very genesis of this video. I wouldn't have made this had I not gone out there. Not only was I able to pilot a Battlemech which was a fixture of my earliest memories of Battletech in the 90s, but I got to do it while playing a series of fun games with friends from around the continent. I really hope people enjoy the second season of the Mechnificent 7, which should be coming out either very late this month in October or in November of this year. As a finale to all of this, I also want to give a massive thank you to Tommy, Paul, Jesse, Scott, Henny, Josh, Tex, Sage, Devin, Adrian, and of course Randall. Why? For being a ton of fun to play with, and for getting together to put something out for everyone to enjoy. Also, for putting up with me, as I can be a complete pain in the ass. So, join us on the adventure. A link to the series is going to be pinned in the top comment below once the opening episode is ready to go. In the meantime, I will have a link to Six Sides of Gaming's YouTube channel for you to keep your eyes peeled for Season 2. I will also have a link to Season 1 in the meantime too, just in case you missed the first time around, and just in case you want to see some of the incredibly devilish things I do in the first season. Don't worry, it's just a precursor to the second. So strap yourselves in, enjoy the ride, and prepare to watch me make a total jackass of myself in public for all of your amusement, while we make the inner sphere a slightly worse place by our actions in it, in the Mechnificent 7. You'll love it if you enjoy RPG playthroughs. Mech 7, by the way, broadly showcases the Battletech Aces card system too, which I do plan to cover with a video in November. It allows for solo play, but really its greatest strength is in allowing cooperative play of Battletech. Keep your eyes out for it, and for the Mechnificent 7, hopefully in November. Oh, and to quote the immortalized figure of Columbo, just one more thing. Did you know that the most notable Free Worlds League mercenary unit they can truly call their own, as Hansen's Rough Riders, while they did come out of it, really came from somewhere else first, is the 17th Recon Regiment, with its leadership and membership hailing from the Trinity of Southwestern Worlds, a fringe group of planets near the Duchy of Tamarind Abbey, on the periphery side of it. These tough mercenaries began making their presence known in the War of 3039, and despite being from the League, their first major appearance certainly didn't start in their homeland, as Camachos Caballeros, as they are much more commonly known, first began their work for the Federated Commonwealth fighting the Draconis Combine. Ironically, fighting the very allies of their home country. Eventually, though, they would find their way working for the Dragon itself, once the death to mercenaries decree was reversed. They also saw fighting in Operation Bulldog. After this, there was an ugly affair with the Lyran Alliance, a brief iteration of the Lyran Commonwealth. In the aftermath, and in the wake of the breakup of the Free Worlds League, the unit found its way back home to the Trinity Worlds, fighting the Marians, as you do, and later working for their somewhat restored home country, the Free Worlds League, in battles against the Periphery Power. So, why am I telling you about the 17th Recon Regiment? Well, it's simple, really. There will be a Camachos Caballeros Force Pack coming at some point in the future. If I'm not mistaken, the second half of 2026. Though any timelines of these things are, of course, soft. However, I'm sure all of you are wondering, why am I mentioning this? The Ilclan era Camachos pack is going to have a Free Worlds League staple in it, in the form of, yes, the Grand Titan. And yes, the Grand Titan you have seen in this video is the new appearance of the Battlemech going forwards. In fact, in Camachos Force Pack, there might even be at least one more staple of the League appearing in it as well. But you'll need to be patient for this one, as I mentioned. However, when this pack does drop, you'll be able to march to war with the Grand Titan at your back. And with those two incredible announcements, I just want to thank you all for joining me here today. This was definitely a pleasure to make. I got to talk a bit about the Free Worlds League, and about the second Battlemech I ever owned. It was an absolute blast. Before we get too much further though, I just want to remind people to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. There's always more in the works, with my next major video being planned as the remaster of the Vindicator. Also, if you really want to help out close to this video's launch, please consider hyping it as well, as a part of YouTube's new feature. I know it's a pain, but it really does help. I mean it. Another great way to help out too, is if you just share the video with your friends. An enormous effort was put into this video, and I'd normally not ask, but this one took a long time and I really did do my best with it, so I hope it is up to your standards. Also, I want to give a massive shout out to the YouTube channel members who support this channel. These videos would not be possible without you guys. I really mean it. And of course, most of all, I hope this video has hit the standards you have all come to expect. Indeed, this particular overview was one of the biggest projects I've ever worked on, despite it not being like 5 hours long. And no prior project has had this much artwork specifically made for it. In this case, I really have 5 artists I have to thank in particular, who came in with artwork for this project. And I also have some other people to credit as well. First up is Jaden Morris, who completed the Silverhawks in their lowest moment, as well as an art piece of the Tamarin regulars beating the heck out of the Marian Hegemony. The Silverhawks piece in particular really captured the downfall of House Marik. I'd never put anything together with Jaden up until this point, but his stuff's absolutely great, and I expect there will be more artwork from him for the channel in the future. Next on the list is Eldonius Rex, who came in with both the line art of the Grand Titan, as well as a piece I've nicknamed Kerberos, showing off the Free Worlds guards clashing with the Smoke Jaguars, which was inspired by a classic piece of artwork from the Dragon's Roar sourcebook. For anyone who's followed other projects I've done on this channel for years now, they'll be familiar with Alan Blackwell's incredible artwork. Alan thankfully made time to create the ultimate Falcon Punch on the Lyran Atlas. I really wanted something that captured the same energy as the famous art piece where an Atlas is caving in a Warhawk's head. And Alan absolutely landed it. This was fantastic. And then we've got Marco Mazzoni. Marco's artwork really is meant to depict a ton of things in it. The rise from the grave, the fight against the odds, and the darker nature of the war between two groups of people who won't be finding peace. I remember when going over the ideas behind this particular piece of artwork, he said something that stuck to me in regards to these particular pictures since then. He said, "Only bad vibes then," which is what I've nicknamed these. They're just called bad vibes to me. And that includes both the original and the darker shot. These two pieces of artwork are absolute treasures, and once more depict the Tamarin regulars. This time, it's them clashing with Clan Wolf. And unlike in the first image from Jaden, where the wolves are shown, this time, the boot's on the other foot, as the Amarok pilot finds out in the middle of the piece. This is the first time I've had the chance to work with Marco, and once more, it was great. Expect a piece from him for a Falconer video, either later this year or early next year too. Finally, a huge thank you to Bruce Pinard, who did the portrait of Anson Marik. I really found, given the Grand Titan was made on Keystone, and given it was in the Marik Stewart Commonwealth, the latter portion of this video really couldn't be disconnected from that character. Bruce brought him to life superbly, and I think it really enhanced when I was quoting him, or talking about him. He's the last Marik on screen I've really genuinely enjoyed reading. People really should check out The Last Charge by Jason Hardy. I ended up rereading the entire novel for this video. I forgot just how much I enjoyed it. Seeing his growth as a person, starting as a selfish, petty man, to becoming someone eventually choosing to lay down their own life for their people in order to achieve a victory past their lives, was a great journey. And his end really hit me. That man was the last real Captain General, at least to me. One quick shout out at the end. I believe Anthony Scroggins did the redesign on the Grand Titan for Catalyst. Anthony always knocks it out of the park, and this thing looks absolutely amazing. Thank you, Anthony, for doing such a great job. Again though, huge thank you to all of the artists involved, especially with the timelines we had in place. Normally my stuff is pretty open-ended in that respect, but this time it was a little bit different. By the way, for those who were wondering, the Grand Titan N20C, which you saw displayed in this video, will be a canon design. I did have a small role in designing some of it, however it was refined by Johannes Hiedler, who is the main mech designer for Catalyst Game Labs. So I want to give credit to him for finishing the mech and making sure that it was able to match up with the expectations and canonical elements that will be a part of the mech going forward. So, thank you, Johannes, and I hope people enjoy the N20C once it gets out there. The next person to thank, who really is the bedrock for me covering this mech and getting it all done, was Randall Bills. I really wanted to do something special with Aces and the Mechnificent 7 coming out, since, as I mentioned before, I did end up piloting a Grand Titan, despite its lack of internal pips in Alpha Strike. Still, because of me piloting it in part of the adventure, it just felt fitting to cover something like this. I was even more pleasantly surprised when I found out it'd be coming out in a pack eventually too. So, I did end up asking Randall about doing this video, and that set the gears in motion for me to show off something to all of you that was not even shown off to the public yet. Randall's a super cool dude, as well as a friend, and I consider it a great honor to have been able to bring all of this to all of you. I also want to say that Catalyst Game Labs has always been very open and honest with me. Everyone I know from there I consider a really solid person, from their core staff to every freelancer I've personally met. I've enjoyed tons of what they've put out, even if there are a few notable exceptions. And I'm always looking forward to more. While this video was not sponsored by Catalyst Game Labs, as I was not paid to do this to be very clear, in this instance this overview would not have been possible without them. And you know what? A ton of content I produce on this channel, where I delve into not only the classical eras, but into the Dark Age and Ilclan eras too, wouldn't be possible without the work that they've put into the setting for years. For real. Thank you, Catalyst. And again, thank you, Randall. There are tons of great resources out there covering everything I went over in the video. Check out the top pinned comment for all of the resources I used. Seriously, if you're interested in the histories that I talked about here, you should get the fuller picture by doing that. Finally though, the music in this video came from two sources primarily. The songs used during the Star League portion of the script came from Jesse Gallagher and Underbelly and Ty Mayer, which were provided through the YouTube Music Library. The rest of the music, which is quite an extensive score, comes from Scott Buckley. The individual songs are all tagged per his use requirements in the description of the video. I hope people check them out, because Scott does incredible work, and I think all of you will appreciate his work in its greater, fuller composition. I think that covers just about everything now. That's the full credits behind this video, but the most incredible people for the credits are, of course, the viewers and channel members, because this content is only made possible because of viewers like you. So what did you think of the Grand Titan? What do you think of the new look? What do you think of the Force Pack coming sometime next year? Oh, and what did you think of all of the artwork? Which piece was your favorite? Did you enjoy the brief ride through some of House Marik's lore and history? Which variant of the Grand Titan was your favorite? Do you like the marauding monster that I helped put together in the N20C? Let me know in the comments section below. I will catch you all there.